You know, I'm usually not a fan of the History Channel. It's just not one of those channels that I actually turn to very often and go, man, I really got to watch this show. I want a documentary to be really interesting, for it to be something that really catches me, and for it to be that, for me, it has to be about something or someone that has caught my attention in the past. And the History Channel usually has stories about the World Wars. And while I know that's interesting to a lot of you, and I know a lot of you that's really personal to, that's just not something I want to sit down and watch. Sometimes they have these documentaries about all these ancient civilizations. And lately they've had all these documentaries about aliens. That's fine for people who are into those things. But for me, History Channel is just usually full of a lot of shows that I'm not interested in. Occasionally, however, every great once in a while, they will have something that will catch my attention, and I'll just have to set the DVR to record just to see if it's something that I can sit through and watch. It's exactly what happened with the miniseries that I found myself watching last year. There was a show that Kevin Costner was going to be starring in. And when I saw that he was going to be playing one of the lead roles, I thought, okay, Kevin Costner on the History Channel might give this some pull, so I'll give it a chance. He was in this series called The Hatfields and the McCoys. So I checked it out. And it was wonderful. It was great. It had everything I like. I enjoy Westerns from time to time. My grandpa was a huge John Wayne fan. He grew us up watching these things. So this Western, it was good. It was what I needed. And the Hatfields and the McCoys, it was a classic. It was the classic story of not being able to escape your past. You see, Randall McCoy and Devil Anse Hatfield had this feud that goes back to the Civil War. And actually, it goes back a little bit further than that. It goes back to before the Civil War. And they don't get into the pre-feud thing. They don't get into the origin of the feud all that much. They just get into the feud. And from that point on, you see how this sleepy little town in Kentucky goes crazy. Goes from bad to worse. See, in one of the families, I don't remember if it was the Hatfield or the McCoys, but one of the families, one of the girls decides, you know what I need? I need a boy from the other family. And they fall in love, and they decide, we're going to get married, and they run off. And they're going to flee this life of this feud, and they're going to run away, and they're on their way to where they're going to start this life together. They're on their way to their marriage. And they can't even get a few miles down the road before they get word that one of the Hatfield or McCoy brothers has killed one of the Hatfield or McCoy brothers. And it pulls them both back into this fight. And this young love relationship that you thought was blooming can't overcome the past. There's also this great scene where a small Church of Christ, a small Church of Christ, a little smaller than this, but a small Church of Christ in this town is in the midst of all of this tension. And they have their service, and you can see the preacher up there, and they're singing their songs, but you can tell that you could cut the tension with a knife. Their glances back and forth, and it kind of disrupts the service, and people are divided over who's right and who's wrong, and there's this ordeal over a pig, I believe. The church is supposed to be the body of Christ, and we're all supposed to be members of it. That church, that body, was at war within itself. Church could not overcome those two families' past. And in one of the final scenes of the movie, one of the patriarchs, and again, I don't know which one. It wasn't Kevin Costner, it was the other one. The other patriarch is in his home drunk, and he's mad. You can see this anger just burning in his eyes, this rage that's deep within him. He's drunk and he's sitting in front of a fire, looking at his bottle. He grabs his bottle and he throws it into the fire. Catches the whole place on fire. And the rage in his eyes is matched with the fire in his eyes is matched with the fire around him. And the whole house burns to the ground. Past frustrations are felt even here in the midst of death. These families could not escape their pasts. It's a tragic story. Can we escape ours? See, in the Bible, there's a great story about trying to escape our past, about a man trying to escape his past. Genesis chapter 37, part of what we read this week, in chapter 3 of the story, the series that we're going through, is the story of Joseph being sold into slavery. And they highlight this like crazy because it is important. I mean, we love that story, and we know that story because we know what happens afterwards. We know that Joseph doesn't stay in prison. He doesn't just stay this lowly boy. It's not like he takes a demotion. All of a sudden, I'm a great brother, but after that, I'm just a slave. No, he goes from brother to slave to king, and everything's great, right? There's one problem. Genesis 37 is selling Joseph into slavery. Genesis 39 is Joseph and his dreams. Genesis 38. Genesis 38 is the story of Judah and Tamar. Scholars forever have been trying to figure out, how does this story fit into the story of Joseph? You see, it's there, and for some reason Genesis 38 was left out of our reading this week. But I really want to talk about it because I think it actually makes the rest of the story make more sense. So if you got a Bible, turn over to Genesis 38. That's where we're going to spend our time this morning. Genesis 38. Just like we saw in the mini-series, there are several times where this character, Judah, attempts to avoid his past. You know, characters in that story were trying to escape the past all the time. But Judah does it in a different way. Genesis 38, let's start in verse 1. It happened at that time that Judah went down from his brothers and settled near a certain Adulamite whose name was Hira. So if you remember back in Genesis 37, Joseph has just been sold into slavery by his brothers. And when Israel, his father, hears about this, Israel just breaks down. He takes this really hard. I mean, Joseph was his favorite son. And all of a sudden, that leaves Judah in this precarious situation. My dad is breaking down. I sold my brother into slavery, so what am I going to do? He leaves. He leaves and settles near a certain Adulamite. He tried to escape his problem. Go back to Genesis 38 again. The next several verses in Genesis 38 tell the story of Judah meeting his wife and making their 3 sons, Onan, and Shelah. Marries Tamar. Is wicked and God kills him before he gives birth to a child, before he gives Tamar a child. The way the system works back then, if the oldest brother doesn't give his wife a child, it falls on the next brother to do so. That means that Onan is in line. But Onan is wicked as well, and he prevents Tamar from becoming pregnant. And so this angers God, and God kills him as well. So that only leaves the youngest brother, Shelah, who is just a boy. And in verse 11, this is how Judah responds to Tamar. He says, "Remain a widow in your father's house until my son Shelah grows up." For he feared that he too would die like his brothers. So Tamar went to live in her father's house. She did just what he said. But do you see what Judah's doing here? Again, we're looking at Judah this morning. So what is he doing? Judah is trying to escape the deaths of his son by pinning the blame on them on Tamar and withholding Shelah from her. You see, it's really easy. I've had 2 sons die, and they've both been married to this woman. Clearly it's her. That's what Judah's saying. He's escaping this grief by pinning the blame on her. Let's keep reading because this theme keeps coming up. Starting in verse 12. In course of time, the wife of Judah, Shua's daughter, died. So his wife dies. When Judah's time of mourning was over, he went up to Timnah to a sheep shearer's, he and his friend Hira the Adulamite. Now the sheep shearing is actually a festival that we read about in 1 Samuel. And it seems as if Judah and his buddy are going to this huge party. A couple of verses later, we find out that on the way to this party, when they're getting close to this sheep shearing festival, when they're about to enter through the gates, what does Judah find? He finds himself a harlot, making the reader assume Judah is trying to escape the grief of losing his wife. He's just lost 2 sons. He's just, he's just lost his wife. So what does he do? He goes to a huge party. The sheep shearing party is when they celebrate all of their affluence. It's the time of year when they're getting ready to go celebrate because they know that they're going to get a lot of money for all these sheep that they're about to shear. It's a great time of year, great time of celebration. He's going to this great party. He's escaping the grief through that, through a harlot. But there's one more place that makes me feel like Judah is trying to escape his past. Judah pays the harlot in credit by giving a cord, a staff, and a ring, and says that he'll bring a young goat when he comes back through. So in verse 20, he sends his servant. When Judah sent the kid by his friend the Adulamite to recover the pledge from the woman, he could not find her. He asked the townspeople, "Where is the temple harlot who was at Enaim by the wayside?" But they said, "No harlot has been here." So he returned to Judah and said, "I have not found her." Moreover, the townspeople said, "No harlot has been here." Judah replied, "Let her keep the things as her own. Otherwise, we will be laughed at. You see, I sent this kid, and you could not find her." This is the saddest one of all to me. Judah is trying to escape shame here. He doesn't want to be laughed at. See, from the beginning of this story, from the very beginning, when Judah pops up, when Judah's character is shown, we can see that he is not a character with strong character. He is an escape artist, someone who, when the going gets tough, he leaves. You see, every time something got hard, every time a situation got difficult, he took the easy way out. He tried to escape his past. but God. But God had other designs for Judah's life. God brought Tamar into Judah's life to teach him how to own up to his responsibilities. Because Judah was completely in the wrong. You might be thinking to yourself, wait a minute, she was a prostitute. But not so fast. Let's do a little hypothetical here. Pretend for a moment that you work for a business and are promised a promotion after a certain amount of time. Your previous experiences with the company have been pretty poor. Your first boss, who is now gone, was manipulative and rude and made coming to work every day, very difficult. There were days that work was nice, but those days were outnumbered by the bad. So his bosses, the higher-ups in the company, were faithful to you. So you thought, and you stayed with the company. The next boss came in, but as bad as your former boss was, this one was worse. This boss did not even pretend to like you, so waking up for work each day became increasingly difficult. Higher-ups in the company saw that he was not effective in his job performance and relieved him of his responsibilities and created an opportunity for the promotion that you have been waiting for. But instead of giving you the promotion, they just leave the boss role vacant. You pick up the slack. You function as the boss for the company, doing all of the things that the boss was supposed to do without the benefits and compensation. You were faithful to the company. Your bosses, the company, was not faithful to you. Tamar was faithful to Judah's family. Tamar went home to her father. She did what Judah told her to do. Tamar did not become a harlot. She was not on the side of the road meeting every man that came by. That's not what the story says. The story says that she became a harlot to find him, to find Judah. She did not commit adultery. She did not cause her father-in-law to commit adultery. Tamar, by the work of God, forced Judah to take responsibility for the promises and actions that he had made and to stand up and be who he is called to be. In church, do you know how the rest of Judah's story unfolds because of that? It starts off with this. He cries for Tamar to be stoned, to be taken care of, because she's pregnant. But then he finds out it's his kid, and she is found to be more righteous than he. Because she was well within her rights, and she did what she was supposed to do, and he was wrong. The rest of what we see about Judah are things we read about this week in chapter 3 of the story. Judah is the one that leads his brothers down to Egypt. And when Joseph sends him back to fetch Benjamin, it is Judah who convinces his father to send the very last son of Rachel and swears on Judah's own life that he will bring him back. And when Joseph deceives his brothers and makes them return and calls Benjamin a thief, it is Judah's plea that leads to Joseph revealing that he is their brother. And in Genesis 49, when Israel is blessing his sons, the birthright passes over the first 3 oldest sons. And it rests on Judah, whose story turned around because of Tamar. Tamar, by the power of God, helped Judah take responsibility for his life and did not allow the past to dictate his future. And that is good news for us. That is great news for us because our past do not determine our futures. The things that we have done in the past do not determine the things that we will do in the future. The person I was yesterday does not determine the person I will be tomorrow. People can change. Our CASA program has seen people come in riddled with addictions that they struggle with. And by the power of God, they have been able to leave those demons behind and not let their past determine their futures. That is good news. I have a friend who's actively engaged in prison ministry that I met at LCU. And the reason he is so actively engaged in prison ministry is because he was in prison for 15 years for a heinous crime that he committed that he was not apologetic about at his trial. But something happened and his life changed, and the person he was in the past was not the person he became in the future. Church, God can do amazing things to change us. God can put people in our lives to change us. And God can put us in people's lives to change them. That is the message this morning. If you would like to respond, we offer the invitation.